Press the bell icon on the YouTube app and never miss any update from Tech Primers. Welcome to Tech Primers. In this video, we are going to see how to create a Spring Boot application with Spring Security enabled using OAuth2. In my previous videos, you would have seen how we can use Spring Security with different variety of authentication systems like JWT or the direct database interaction. In this particular video, we are going to see how to use OAuth2 inside Spring Security in a Spring Boot application. So before going into the details of creating the application, so we need to understand what we need to create. So what I will be doing is I will be creating an authorization server and embedding the resource server inside the authorization server. So I'll be creating two different services. One will be an authorization server along with a resource server, and the other one will be the client with which we will be accessing the server. So the authorization server will have the tokens generated and the resource server will validate these tokens. So I just wanted to create only two applications. So from the source application, we are going to query the authorization server, get the token back, and then query the resource server, which is also inside the same server, but the resource server will validate the application, right, with the tokens. So we are going to create two services. One is the authorization server along with the resource server. The other one is the client with which we are going to access the authorization and the resource servers, right? So let's go through the start.spring.io where we generally create our project. So I'm going to create Tom Tech Primers security. So let's name the application as Spring Security -auth server, right? So I'll name that as auth server. So the name, the dependencies which we require are the web, the OAuth2, right? And what else do we need? I think that's it. So we don't need anything else for the auth server. So I'll just create this. Next is the client, right? So I'm going to create it as client, Spring Security client. The dependencies which we need are web and the OAuth2, and along with that we are going to use Timeleaf for the UI. So I'm not going to use the simple Angular or anything. I'm just going to use Timeleaf UI to show the login screen, right? So I'm going to create this project as well. So we have generated both the projects. Let's unzip these projects so that we can use it in IntelliJ. So if you go through the pom.xml entry which we have created, right? So if you notice that we have the OAuth2, we have the Timeleaf, and we have the starter web. There might be Timeleaf extras which we require as well, but we'll add that later, right? So for now, let the dependencies get downloaded. I think it will take a few more minutes so that all the dependencies are downloaded. Let me check the other one. I think in the auth server the dependencies are already downloaded, right? Okay, so let's go and get started with the auth server. So the two dependencies which we have in the auth server are the cloud starter OAuth and the Spring Boot starter web, right? Because the server, the resource server requires a REST endpoint with which we are going to access the REST endpoint, right? That's why we have added the Spring web there. Cool. So now we need to add some configurations. Basically Spring is all about configurations, right? So we need to create some configurations. So what we are going to do is we are going to create a configuration for the resource server now. So I'll just create a package now. called config, and inside that I'm going to create a Java class. So let's call it as a resource server config, right? Because we need to add these configurations for the resource server specifically, right? So we need to enable this with enable resource server. So I'm just adding that annotation, and I need to enable this with configuration so that this is loaded by Spring Boot by default. We need to override the web security configurer adapter. So it's a class. Now we need to override that web security configurer adapter, right? So we need to override some methods because we need to add some security to the resource REST endpoints, right? We are going to create some REST endpoint for the resource, so we need to enable the uh, security for that, right? So that is why we need this. So what we are going to do here is we are going to create the override for the, which method do we need to override, right? So there is a configure method which will accept the HTTP security, so we are going to override that, right? And instead of the super.configure, we are going to say HTTP, I need to match the URLs, so we are going to say request matchers, right? And match the URLs using the ant matchers. Let's say the list endpoint is called login, right? And also some OAuth, right? So OAuth, let's say OAuth/authorize is the REST endpoint which I have. So I'm going to say that match these two and also authorize these requests. So what we are telling Spring Security is match these two logins and then authorize them, right, for any request which comes to these, right, and then make them authenticated. So this will allow us to do authentication, right? And what else do we need? So we need to also show the login page, right? So I'm going to say login, form login, so this will enable the login page. So and finally I'm saying for the form login, just allow everybody to use the form login, so that will allow the form login to be used by anybody, right? So apart from this, what do we need to override? We need to override the other configurer which is using the authentication builder. If you notice here, there is an authentication builder, so we are going to override that as well, and we are going to give the authentication manager. So I'm going to say auto wire the authentication manager, right? And here I'm going to use this particular authentication manager inside the authentication builder. So using the authentication builder, we need to say the parent authentication manager as the authentication manager which we have, right, which we just auto wired. And then I'm not going to do any database validation for now in this particular example, so I'm going to do in-memory authentication. In the next example, I'll show you how to do database authentication. The only thing is you will be using user detail service, which we have seen in the other Spring Security examples. However, for simplicity, I want to concentrate more on the OAuth2 example, then we can shift to the authentication using the database, right? So for now, I'll just use the in-memory authentication with some username and password. So I'm going to use Peter and Peter as the password, lowercase Peter as the password, right? And I'm going to assign some role to Peter. I'm going to assign the role of admin to Peter, right? Okay, that's it. So what we have done here in this particular configuration is we have created authentication manager, and then we are providing it to the builder saying use the in-memory authentication using these details, because when you authenticate you need to provide a username and password, and we need to get the roles, right? So this Peter username is going to return the role as admin for now. So this is just going to be an in-memory authentication, so it will not use any database for authentication. And also to allow the URLs, we are just saying Spring security that okay, allow these particular URLs. So enable a form login as well, so that user can see a login screen where they can enter the Peter details, whatever the username and password, right? So that is what we have done in this particular configuration. Okay, now we can move to the authorization server configuration. So I need to create a authorization server config, right? This particular config needs to be annotated with enable authorization server, and also we need to add the configuration so that Spring Boot can load it. And in this particular example, for the authorization server, we need to extend the authorization server configure adapter. So in the previous configuration, we overrode the web configure adapter. Here we have to override the authorization configure adapter so that we can modify the authorization server which Spring provides into the way we wanted. So that is what we are doing here. So we are overriding the authorization server which Spring already has, and we are going to override some methods here. So there is a configure method. So similar way how we did there, we are going to use the method which has the authorization server security configurer. So where is that authorization security configurer? Yeah, so here, so we need to use this particular security, and then we need to secure this particular authorization server. So I'm going to use security dot token key access. So here I'm going to say who all can access the token keys. So I'm for now I'm going to say allow everybody. So I'm just saying permit all, and we need to validate this token, right? So in order to validate this token, we can say whether this validate token is authenticated or something. Before this token is generated, you need to check if it is authenticated, right? That is why we wrote this particular config. So here we do the authentication, and here we do the authorization. So authentication is where you just check whether you have the your username and password is present, or you have the access to login. Authorization is where you just check if you have the relevant roles for authorizing, for accessing that particular resource or something like that. So that is the authorization server, right? So that is it for this. So one more configuration which we need to override is the configure adapter which has the client details, right? So we are going to use again we are going to use the same clients. Similar way we need to override some in-memory stuff. So we are going to say that I'm going to use in-memory, I'm not going to use any database or something, because the SSO details or the OAuth2 details needs to be stored somewhere, right? The authorization server needs to validate the data from somewhere, right? For now I'm going to use the in-memory again. So same like how we use the username and password. So here also we have some information. So for example, with client, so we need to provide the client ID with which the user will be accessing the server. So I'm going to say just client ID. I'm just not giving anything else. I'm just giving a simple text client ID, and there is a secret which we need to give it, which we need to give as well. So I'm not going to do anything there. I'm just going to say secret, right, as an example. And we need to provide what type of grants we need to give, right? So in this particular example, I'm going to use the authorization code as the grant, right? That is one of the type of grants. So and also I'm going to say what is the scope of my particular authorization. So I am saying it's user underscore info. So it's going to be user information which we have, right? And also finally I'll just do a auto approve so that the tokens are generated, right? You can also have tokens validation set. I'm not going to do anything right now, so we can see that in the next example, next complex example. But for now I'm just going to create a simple Spring security application with which we can use OAuth2 to authenticate it, right? The next one is the last override which we had, right? The endpoint override. So we need to override this endpoint with the authentication manager which we auto void, right, in the previous example. So same way we have to use the endpoints, and then we are going to say use my authentication manager. I think I haven't auto void here. I'll just auto void here. Right, that's it. So all the configurations are done both for the authorization server and the resource server, right? So now what else do we need? So now we need to create the resource, right? Exactly, the resource needs to be accessed by the resource server. So I'm going to create a hello resource so that we can access that particular resource. This is simply going to be a Spring MVC application, Spring MVC controller. So I'm just going to say REST controller. I'm adding a REST request mapping, and I'm going to say REST slash hello, right? And let's do the get mapping here. If somebody accesses REST slash hello, we should be able to return them a string saying hello world, right? Fine. So this is our ultimate goal. So the client needs to access this particular REST endpoint called REST slash hello. In order to access this particular REST endpoint, he needs to do the authentication and authorization and provide the token. That is when the Spring security will allow him to access this particular REST endpoint. That is our ultimate goal. So that is why we are adding these authentication servers configurations and authorization server configuration, right? So the next step is to add some properties, right? So the port number in which I want to start this particular process is 8081, let's say, right? Okay. And also I want to have this whole server have a path slash auth or something like that, so that I know that this is authentication server, right? So I'm going to just give a slash auth as the default path. So this all the REST endpoints will have this slash auth as the context. So that is why I'm just using the server.context.path. This will override the default path for every REST endpoint. Also, I'm going to disable the basic security because we already have our security enabled using the authorization server. So I'm going to enable the Spring's basic security. Okay, so that is what this is all about, right? So I think our server is done. Let's go to the client part. Where is our client? Yeah, so the client is here. So in the client part, we need to create some configurations for the OAuth2, right? Because the client is where we will decide what authentication it needs to use. So that is where we are going to say OAuth2 should be used. So we need to create some configuration there in the client part. So I'm going to create a folder called config as usual, and I'm going to create the class called OAuth config, right? And this is where we are going to enable the OAuth2. Okay, so we need to enable the annotation called OAuth2 SSO, and I'm going to enable the add configuration as usual. For this, again, we need to extend the web security configurer adapter, web security configurer adapter. So because we need to override some URLs, right? We need to allow some URLs. So we need to tell Spring security what we need to allow. So that is why we are overriding web security configurer adapter. And the one which we are going to allow is the same HTTP security. And here, what do we need? We need to do some and matches again. So we need to say and matcher. So in this particular case, I'm going to say allow all my URLs, right? Allow all my URLs to be authorized. So I'm saying that authorize all those requests, and I'm saying give me some specific URL, right, which is having login. So I'm saying that, okay, give me access to only the slash login URL, right? because I need to access that, right? So anybody should be able to access the login URL. So I'm saying that, okay, allow anyone to do the access to the login apart from the apart from the login and the root, right? So this is nothing but root. So whenever you first initially hit, it will go to slash, right, where you load your index.html or any other default page. So that is this root, and then you have a login slash login. So I'm just saying Spring Security that allow only these two URLs. Apart from that, the rest all the URLs should be authorized. So I'm just saying permit all, and I'm saying any other request should be authenticated, right? That's it. So we're just allowing only these two URLs to be accessed by anybody else. That's it. So that is why we have overridden the Spring Security configure adapter. Okay, now apart from this, so we have now enabled the configuration. We need to enable the Spring Web MVC security, right? So in order to do that, because we need to add the UI into the web, right? So we need to add the time leaf, whatever I mentioned, right? So we need to add the time leaf web pages onto the Spring Boot application. So in order to do that, we need to override the configuration called Web MVC configure adapter. So this is nothing but web security configure adapter, which will allow us to control the Spring security framework. But in order to have our UI integrated into the Spring MVC framework, we need to override the web MVC configure adapter. So I'm going to create something called web config, so that we have our enable web MVC. So this will enable our UI. So I'm going to say add configuration. We need to extend our web MVC configure adapter, right? And we need to override some methods here as usual. So we are going to override the default one first, configure default servlet. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to say configure dot enable it. So I'm going to by default enable the configure servlet handling, right? So I'm going to enable this, saying okay, use the default servlet handling, so that I will allow you to control the web page you are going to hit. The next one is the view controller, right? So that is where we will be pushing our UI, right, our HTML page. So I'm going to use the super, and along with that super, we are going to use the registry to register some of our UIs, right? So you can say add view controller, and then you can say the URL here. So for example, I'm going to say in the root, give that particular name and then forward it to a different URL, right? For example, if you hit a slash, you need to forward it to the index page, right? So I'm going to say just forward this to the page called index, right? So that I have the default pages index which is loaded. The next one I wanted to add is the index again, right? And also I need to add some other page which I need to have it secured, right? So I will just say secure. So let's say there are two pages, one is the index and one is the secure, where if you want to access secure, you should be logged in, right? So that is why I'm accessing, I'm just saying the Spring MVC that I will create two pages, one called index, one called secure, and I'm adding that to the controller here, right? So next one, the final thing would be where will these be present, right? So where should be these be present? So there is a resource, add resource handlers. So here we are going to register those registry and say where these will be present. So these will be generally present in the resources directory, all these static files, right, the HTML files. So we need to give the path here. That is what I'm doing here. So we need to provide the handlers and the locations for the these handlers. So I'm just going to say resources slash, right? That's it. So these are nothing but configurations. So these are configurations which you require for setting up your client. And apart from this, we need to also have the property resource placeholder configurer, because we need to provide a, we need to create a bean and we need to inject this when the Spring Boot loads, right? So I'm going to say property source placeholder configure, and we need to just provide a new property. So that Spring Boot uses this particular property resources placeholder because we have created some properties here, the resources, right? So these need to be loaded into these configure adapter. So that is why we are manually creating it, or else Spring Boot will not know it, right? So I think we are done with our setup here. Apart from this, we also need to create the request context listener, because we are creating these view controllers, right? So we need to provide the bean which we need for the servlet, right? For the Tomcat basically. So we need to override the request context listener, and we need to provide the new instance of it so that Spring Boot can use this particular instance. Okay, so I think that is it. Now we need to create the configurations which we need. So the application properties or the HTML files, right? So I'll create the application YAML in this case, because I need to load some of them before even the application properties is loaded. That is why I need the application YAML. So I'll just say my default port is 8082. We created 81, right? So I'll just create 8082, and also the context path for this I can make it as /UI. There we had a /auth to know that that is an authorization server, and we need to add some session cookies. So I'm going to say my session cookie name should be something like UI session, right? You can give any name. I'm just giving a UI session because people use UI session. And we need to disable the basic security, which we did in the same in the server side, right? Because we have already overridden these. The other security which we need to take care is the OAuth2, right? For OAuth2 we need to now add the configurations, right? So for example, the client, we added something in the server side, right? So in the server side, what did we do? We added the client ID as client ID secret and all these things, right? So these need to be provided from the client side. So for the client, I need to have the client ID. So what is the client ID? The client ID, I named it as client ID itself. Then there is a secret, right? It's called client secret, and that's called secret. Now we need to give the access token URL, right? So this is where the OAuth2 client will go and access. So this should be the URL of the server, the authentication or the authorization server, right? So it will be http://localhost:/8081, right? Yeah, :8081, and the context path we had given as auth, and then we will have OAuth/token. So this is the default URL which will be created by the OAuth server. And the next one will be the user access. So now once you create the token, you need to now access the user needs to access it, right? So there is an endpoint called user authorization URI that you need to provide. Again, it will be almost similar, but the endpoint will be slightly different. This is the authorize, right? So this we already had created here. If you notice here, the authorize, we created it in the resource config here. Yeah, see this, right? This is for the resource where the user can access that particular REST endpoint. I think that's it for OAuth2 for the client, right? Next one is the resource server. So the resource server needs to be accessed, right? So we need to give the URL for the resource server, so which is nothing but our hello resource, right? So which is nothing but /res/hello. So we need to have the URL mentioned here. So the URL will be user info URI, right? I'm just going to add one um, config called user info, so which is going to be same as http localhost:8081/auth/res/hello, right? So that is the URL which we are going to hit. And finally we need to do something for time leaf. So I'm going to use time leaf cache to be disabled, Okay, I think these are the configurations which we require. That's it. So these are the configurations which we require for the client side, so that the client side can access the server side now. Okay, so next thing would be the HTML pages. So we need to create some index.html. We just added those in the view controller. Now we need to add index.html and secure.html, right? Okay, so in the index.html we need to add some basic stuff. So I'm going to add HTML head. I'm going to add some meta, right? So the meta HTTP equivalent should be content type. I want the content type to be text/HTML because it's going to be HTML page. And also I need to give some char set, right? UTF-8. Okay, I need to give some title here as well. So I'll give the title as Spring Security OAuth example, right? And we'll have some body. Inside the body we can have some div command, or we don't even need it. So we just say h1, we'll say Spring Security OAuth example, right? Now we need to provide a link to the login page from here. So what we can do is we can just say href, what will be the link, right? It's nothing but secure page, right? The secure.html. So we can say login to OAuth here, right? That's it. Okay, so that is it. From the login page we will show just that click on the secure HTML, so that from the secure page we will be doing all the logins here. So after you click on the secure page, it will be redirecting all your information to the secure page, so that secure page can display all the information, right? So I'm going to use the same template here. I'm going to use the same. I'm not going to change anything else except for the place where I'm doing this, right? So I'm just going to add secure so that I know this is a different page, right? So here I'm going to say welcome to Tech Primers, and I'm going to add that particular text which I will be getting from the rest hello. So I'm going to add some hello world. So it's basically going to return some hello world. So th is nothing but the time leaf text, right? Th, not the time leaf, sorry, it's the XHTML. The time leaf is what the value will be having, so which will be nothing but $$ authentication dot name. So this name will be provided by the user. From there mostly it will be, I think it's just the authentication, right? Because it's going to be a string. So let's see what it returns. Even I'm not sure what it returns. So this should be returning hello world, but I just wanted to see what, yeah, this authentication should return the hello world directly, right? I think we are done. Let's start the process. Before that we need to provide the time leaf dependency for dependency. There is a time leaf dependency for the extras. So those extras are the compatibility for the Spring Security 4 So the dependency, the artifact would be time hyphen extras hyphen spring security 4, I guess. Let's see if it is good. Org dot thyme leaf dot extras, right? Meanwhile the same, yeah, it's good now. So we need to add this also to the server. I'll add it here. Yeah. So the import of the server also begin. Meanwhile we can start the server now. We can start both the servers. I'm just double checking my RAM usage. It's a bit old computer, so I'm just cleaning it up now to save some space so that we can use it for our processes, because we have started two processes right now. So there will be two, literally there is the client and the server both running here. So let it come up. Yeah, the client has, I think, come up now, 8082, and the server, I think server has got an exception because I think this is Java 9. I should have changed this to Java 8. Let me change it to Java 8. So if we are not having any authorization server, we can use any authorization server which is already available, like Facebook or even the GitHub one, or even the Google API. So instead of the same authorization server which we created here, this particular server, we can use any third party which will be providing us the authorization details, and we can raise the resource server. So the resource server will now be in our control, and the authorization server will be from a trusted source, right? So yeah, the server is also up now, so the client is also up. Let's go and hit the REST endpoint, I mean the web URL basically. So we had created this 80 under 8082, right? Yeah, if you notice here, the web page is now showing up. This, what is happening here is, inside the web config we added something here, right? The forwarder. So this the view controller is now forwarding all the slash requests to the index.html. So we created an index.html with what content we see, and that is how this web config is working now. And if you click on the login to your auth here, if you notice here in the below, it goes to the secure page. If I click on it, it should now take us to the login page, right? So if you notice here, this is now, it has taken to the auth/login. If you notice, this is nothing but the login page from the server side. So we didn't do anything here. If you notice in the client side, what did we do here in the secure.html? We didn't do anything, right? We didn't do anything because the OAuth2 is taking care of all the web config. Whatever we did here, the secure, the OAuth2 is directly redirecting us to the server side. So from here, using the application.yaml changes which we did here, right? If you notice here, whatever changes we did here, it is now taking us directly to the auth/login, right here. So it's directly taking from the client to the server side. So if you notice, the server side dispatcher serverless has been hit. So where is that URL here? Auth/, yeah, if you notice here, the server is what has a auth, right? So that is why it has gone to auth/login. So this is, it shows like a client, but it indirectly it is going to the auth server, right? So we are going to provide the username and password to the auth server, not to the client. So this page which is showing up, it is not even the client, it is just the server, and we need to provide the detail which we created, right, in the server side. So what did we create? We created Peter, and Peter as the password. Yeah, right. I'm just going to do a login now. So once I log in, if you notice here, it is saying unauthorized, could not obtain user details from the token. So there is an authentication failure error, and if you notice here, there is a code which gives some state and all those things, right? So it looks like this authentication is now failing. So let me go and check why. So if I go and do the UI again, it should now show me, I guess, right? But looks like it is using the same token and it is saying it's unauthorized, because I think I haven't enabled my OAuth here, right? I think I didn't even give any access here. So it is not even going to the slash login now. I mean slash, if I just say, this should not work now. So if you notice here in the URL, it has gone to the OAuth/ um, OAuth, authorize the client ID, and then it has given the username, and it needs to give the login where it should get redirected, right? So that is what it has done now. Okay, this should be 8082, right? If I click on it, it has already could not obtain user details from the token. Why is it not able to get the user details? Did I do anything wrong in the client side? Let's go to the server side, right? So in the authorization server, we did a permit all. Is the spelling right? Permit all and is authenticated. Yeah, it's right only. Then we had the client ID, yes, and then we said user underscore info, that is what we need, and also the authorization code, and the secret is secret. Client ID is client iCaps. Okay, did I have the same client ID here? Yeah, client ID is same, and also the secret is also same, right? So then why didn't it did it screw up in this particular place? Let me check. User authorization URI, which is correct only, and then we have done authorize, right? AUTH, right? And also our REST endpoint is HTTP 8080, and it's called user info URI, right? Which is also right. But why is this not able to access? So this is underscore code only, right? Yeah. Authorization underscore code is authenticated. Yeah, this is also fine. It all looks good. Grant type also application. The web security adapter. Did we do anything? Okay, authorize. We did the same, right? Authorize. The spelling is right. Oh, it's under OAuth and then slash authorize, and then you have a login where you are saying authorize request, and then we are saying any other request should be done, and then form login we are permitting everybody, correct? And then we are providing a username and password, and I think the role should be user because we have done a user info, right? I think that could be a problem. Maybe we can restart and try. Right, it is up now. Let me do a UI. I'll just do a login again. Could not. Why does it say this again and again? Let me open another instance of the browser. I think it stores this in the token, right? We just said a cookie, store it as a cookie. So I'll just log in with the Peter. Still, the Peter did not have access. UI slash login. Did it recharge? Okay, this is the hello resource. We can also add. If we add the same REST endpoint, we can add one more REST endpoint called get mapping, and I'll add a public principal user. It's going to be principal and principal. I'll return the principal again, right? And I'm going to call this as principal. Okay, let me restart this. Meanwhile, I'll also give the same URL here, and I'll also change the authentication name. Right? Did I screw up in the application YAML? Application YAML, how is it? You have port, context, and the session. Right. Name of the cookies, okay. And then we have a client. Under that we have the resource, find info URI, client secret. Is there any spelling mistake here? Access token URI. Then we have Spring timely and cache false. Right. So for now I have just redirected this to the west slash principal. Let's see. We can restart this again. Hopefully they should have, because everything is working. I think the problem is with the resource server only. So Mhm. Well, this is we have the authorization server, tab, everything authenticator, and then parameter, and then we have the role as user, and finally we have that particular response file. Okay, now let's access this guy again. It's 082/UI. You need to provide Peter. So this should provide aha. Now there you go. So the problem is with the role, which is nothing but the user, and also I think we need to provide the principal, because that is what we needed. Right? If you see, Peter had come. Welcome to Tech Primers, Peter. Because the only thing which I have changed here is I have added one more REST endpoint, which is there in the hello resource here. So if you notice here, I just added one more REST endpoint called principal, and the principal is what is going to return me the name. And if you notice here in the HTML, right, in the secure.html, I just use the name. So inside the principal, you will have different values. So I'm just using the authentication.name. So that will give me the value of the Peter. Okay. So that is what has returned now. Okay. So if you see what we have done, I'll just summarize what we did. So if you notice here, if I don't log in and if I directly use this particular URL in this, it won't allow me. It directly redirects me to the login page. If you see here, I just pasted the secure page, but still it redirects me to the authentication servers login. And once I log into that, it will now redirect me to the login page. Okay, it's asking me that, and then it is directly taking me to the login page. Cool. So OAuth is working now. So if we see the if we need to see where is the tokens and stuff, so I can show you that if I do an inspect, right. Okay, I'll just maximize this. I don't need this. So if you see here, this is the token. So we created a cookie, right? We created a cookie called if you notice here, we created a cookie called UI session, right? That is this cookie, and this cookie is now set in the URL. If we delete this cookie, right, then the login will not work. So the login is working because we have the cookie set. That is how it is working, and we don't have any expiration date set right now. That is why the cookie is working. But if we, let's say, if I open it in a incognito window, right, so I'll show it in the incognito window, right. Let me do a inspect here, network, so that I can show you this. I think since I already have one incognito window open, this is again using the same. Let me close this again. I'll open again so that the cookies are new. Right. So if you see here, right now there is nothing in the login. So in the login there is no header. So in the header there is a cookie called JSession ID. There is nothing else apart from that, right? JSession ID is coming from our Tomcat. So now it's asking me to log in. I will just do a login now here with the username and password. Once I log in, if you see here, the cookie will be set here. Yeah, the UI session cookie is set, and that is how we are able to access our secured URL. So what happened in the background is nothing but the OAuth2 Offspring did all our heavy lifting, right? So it queried first, it gave the redirected URL, and then it authenticated. Once it is authenticated, it sent a request to the hello URL, whatever that rest slash hello slash principal, and then it got it. That's what we configured, right? So that is what we configured in the application YAML here in the user info. So that is how it is working, right? So this user info is nothing but the one which we have given in the configuration here in this here the scope, right? So let me summarize what we did. In the client part, we created a web page. We created a web page using Timeleaf. We created an index page. We just said URL to the secure page, and the secure page will have a secure URL using the authentication dot name, which is nothing but coming from the principal which we have configured uh, using the authentication which Spring Boot internally uses, right? So which we have added it as a pom dot dependency here, which is nothing but the OAuth2 dependency here, this one, right? Apart from that, we need to add some configurations to enable the OAuth2. So for example, this at enable OAuth2 we have done, and we have added some configuration saying allow the URLs slash login and slash, so that everyone can access that. Apart from that, any other subsequent ones should be authenticated. Once it is authenticated, it will redirect to the authentication server. Okay, that is when it redirects to the authentication server, and there you show up the login page. That is why whenever we hit slash secure, it redirects directly to the authentication server's login page. The next one would be the web config. So the web config is required in order to have the Timeleaf pages, the HTML pages configured into the Spring MVC framework, and we directly get the index HTML, right? That is why we have added the at enable web MVC, and then we have overridden the web MVC configure adapter. We just enable the servlet handling, and then we have gone and overridden the view controllers with our pages which we have manually added here. That is what we have done here, and also the resources where we are having them. That is what we have added down here. Okay, and also we have enabled the request context listener, which is required to load these. So that is our in the client side. In the server side, in our case, we have created a custom authentication server, but you don't have to do that. If you have Facebook or GitHub APIs, you can go and register in GitHub or Facebook. You have to give all these details what we did here in the client side. We have to give all these details: the access token URI, the client ID, the client secret, the user authentication URI. All these we have to give in the authorization server, which is like Facebook or GitHub. But we have done that here. We have auto configured that here. So by overriding the authorization server configuration, we have enabled the authorization server, and we have overridden some configurations there. Here the default configurations, we for now we have made it as in memory, so that I have hard coded here. If you have any database, you can configure the database here, right? So for the resource server, that is for the authorization server. Authorization server is what authorizes and creates the token. Resource server is where we redirect our request to after the authorization is successful. So once Facebook is done authenticating your token, then it redirects to the resource server. So resource server is where we tell the server that tell the client that okay, I need to go here or I need to go there. So in order to enable the resource server, we have overwritten the web security configurer, and we have enabled the URLs where the request will by default come in. So for example, this OAuth authorize is where the request from the authentication server will redirect to here, and from there we just take it forward. And in order to authorize the security, we are using the Peter login here, the in-memory authentication. So the login page which we saw, that uses this particular login, right? Once it's all successful, it gets redirected to the REST endpoint here. So we have created a REST endpoint called principal there, and then it gets redirected there, right? Okay, so that's it for this particular video. I hope you guys understood how OAuth2 works. So I'll upload this particular example into the GitHub repository. You can take it from there and then use it as a reference project. You can just download and then run in the same way I have run now and shown. So in the subsequent videos, I'll make a complex use case of this particular OAuth and Spring authentication. So if you want me to do any specific use case on OAuth2 you can drop that in the comment section below, or if you want me to do any other video or any other topic, do let me know in the comment section below. If you like the video, go ahead and like it. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, go ahead and subscribe to it. Meet you again in the next video. Thank you very much.